On December 26, 1996, the manager of a company that specialized in installing electrical equipment had just finished a hearty lunch and was heading back to his office when something unexpected caught his eye. A gray-blue minivan was parked on the roadside, appearing to have a flat tire. The man slowed down. He recognized the minivan. It belonged to his employee, 32-year-old Patty Vaughan. The sight seemed to explain a lot, as Patty hadn't shown up for work at her usual time that morning. Even though the day before had been Christmas, Patty wasn't one to party too hard, so her colleagues were wondering why she hadn't arrived on time. Her boss assumed that with a flat tire, she might have abandoned the van and walked the 3 kilometers to the office on foot. With this in mind, he continued on to work. But Patty wasn't there. By that point, no one had heard from her for over a day. Thus began one of the most heartbreaking and frustrating cases in Texas history, where the killer seemed to be just a hair's breadth away from being charged. At first glance, Patty and Jerry Ray Vaughan seemed like the perfect couple. They lived in a lovely home in Lavernia, Texas, and were raising 3 children, 9-year-old Brittany, 7-year-old Ray, and 6-year-old Tyler. Jerry Ray, who everyone called JR, owned a construction contracting company and was able to provide financially for the family. He insisted that Patty not work and stay home with the children. So for 11 years, she had been a stay-at-home mom, attending church and singing in the church choir, while her husband managed his business. But this idyllic picture was deceptive. Patty didn't often complain about her husband, but it was clear she was unhappy with his excessive control over her. After quitting her job and becoming a mother, she fell entirely under his influence. JR didn't allow her to earn her own money and would often make insulting and demeaning comments about her. Although Patty never went to the police, her acquaintances claimed that there were times when he would physically abuse her. But by the fall of 1996, she realized that things could not continue as they were. Surprisingly, her husband understood and agreed to separate. JR moved into a rental apartment, and for the first time in many years, Patty got a job at a company specializing in electrical installations. She worked as a receptionist, and she genuinely enjoyed the job. Her loved ones immediately noticed that she was blossoming. For the first time in years, she seemed happy. Just before Christmas, Patty confided to her family that there was another reason for her newfound joy. A new man had entered Patty's life, although not entirely new. Patty had met Gary back in 1982 when she was 18. The young couple fell in love, but their happiness was very short-lived. Everything came to a sudden end when Gary's former girlfriend, whom he had dated before Patty, announced that she was expecting his child. Gary decided that the child shouldn't grow up without a father. Even though he truly loved Patty, he honestly told her everything, broke up with her, and married the other woman. Patty was devastated, completely crushed by the breakup, but now it seemed like Patty and Gary were getting a second chance at happiness, as Gary had recently divorced his wife. On Christmas Eve, Patty decided to introduce Gary to her family. She was nervous about how they would react to their relationship. Patty had a good reason to be anxious about introducing Gary to her loved ones, as she had already been publicly humiliated over their relationship. It all started a couple of weeks earlier on December 13th, when Patty and Gary went to a Dairy Queen to have lunch. A man who attended the same church as Patty saw them together. He was aware that Patty had separated from her husband 2 months prior, but felt that it was inappropriate for a married woman to be having lunch with another man. He reported this to the church minister. Instead of advising the man to mind his own business, the minister shamed Patty during a choir rehearsal, publicly declaring that she was unworthy of representing the church due to her immoral behavior. The situation escalated to the point where some townspeople openly shared their disapproval with Patty. Fortunately, this did not affect her relationship with Gary, and they continued to see each other. Patty's family also showed much more understanding. They supported her, and the introduction went well. Her loved ones were simply happy to see her truly happy for the first time in a long while. After a wonderful evening together, it was time to say goodbye at midnight, but the family agreed to meet again the following day. On Christmas morning, Patty, JR, and the kids went to church together and then returned to the family home where they exchanged gifts. They were trying to make the separation less painful for the children, so they agreed to spend the holiday together. Additionally, JR's relatives were expected to join them later in the day. After that, JR planned to head out, and Patty was supposed to drop the kids off at her Aunt Jean's house for the evening. She intended to spend time with Gary. They had planned to watch a movie together while Jean and Patty's cousins, Kathy and Barb, looked after the children. However, when evening came, Patty never brought the kids to her aunt's house. She didn't even call to let them know she wouldn't be coming. Her relatives were a bit concerned but assumed that the visit with JR's family had simply lasted longer than expected. However, That wasn't the case. The next evening, JR called Patty's family. Kathy answered the phone, and JR shocked her by saying that Patty had been missing for almost a day. Why did he wait so long to report it? He explained that they had planned to spend the holiday together with the kids, but at some point, Patty got angry with him, stormed out of the house, and drove away. At first, JR wasn't too concerned, but when Patty's boss called him to say he had found her car with a flat tire and no sign of Patty, JR realized something was wrong. JR then took a spare set of keys to her boss, who drove the car back to the office. Shocked by what they heard, Kathy, Barb, and Jean immediately reached out to Gary. They hoped that Patty might be with him, though it seemed unlikely. After a fight with her husband, Patty would most likely have gone to her beloved aunt and cousins. Their instincts were correct. Gary hadn't seen Patty on Christmas, and she hadn't called him. He was just as surprised and worried as they were. This frightened the women even more, and they contacted the sheriff's office to report her disappearance. However, they were told it was too early to file a missing person report since 72 hours had not passed and Patty was an adult. The women insisted that she would never have left without notifying anyone, especially not with 3 children to care for. But the police maintained that there was no evidence that she hadn't left voluntarily. Unable to simply sit and wait, Kathy drove to the road where Patty's minivan had been found and began searching the area in the dark, using a flashlight to guide her. Meanwhile, Jean was calling other family members to see if any of them had heard from Patty. Kathy's search and Jean's phone calls initially yielded no results, until Jean managed to reach Patty's younger sister, Jeannie. Jeannie lived in another state, and, knowing she wouldn't see her older sister over the holidays, had called to wish her a Merry Christmas. She made the call around 10:30 in the morning. JR answered the phone. When he called Patty to come to the phone, she pretended to have a cold, but Jeannie immediately sensed something was off. She had lived with Patty's family for a while and could tell right away that Patty had been crying. Jeannie asked what was wrong, and Patty explained that she and her husband had had a fight. However, she reassured Jeannie that everything was fine, as arguments between them had become common in recent days. In the background, JR was yelling for Patty to get off the phone, and Jeannie couldn't get any more details. But now it was certain that Patty had been home on Christmas morning, and the argument between the couple wasn't as spontaneous and unexpected as JR had described. In fact, they had been fighting all day. The first thing on the morning of December 27th, Jean, Kathy, and Barb went to Patty's workplace to inspect her minivan. To their horror, they discovered that there was no puncture on the supposedly flat tire. It turned out that someone had simply let the air out of the tire. This meant that the scene her boss had come across had been staged. Armed with this information, the sisters contacted the police again, who agreed to start an investigation before the 72-hour waiting period had expired. They began their work by confirming that there were no issues with the tire. However, upon examining the interior of the vehicle, investigators noticed things that the women had overlooked during their initial inspection. First, there were no keys or handbag that Patty had taken with her when she left the house. Second, the driver's seat had clearly been adjusted by someone else. It was positioned differently than how Patty usually set it. But the most alarming finding was that the car was spotless. Patty regularly drove 3 young children, and there were usually toys, snack wrappers, crumbs, and similar debris scattered throughout. However, the vehicle had been cleaned with soap and water, and it hadn't even dried yet. Suspecting that there might be blood, forensic experts took samples for analysis. They also processed the vehicle for fingerprints and found a single fingerprint that did not belong to Patty or anyone in the local or federal police database. Additionally, there was a pile of men's clothing found in the minivan. Among them was a red work jumpsuit with the initials JM embroidered in white. Such clothing is typically worn by plumbers and mechanics. No one had any idea where this clothing had come from. The search for Patty began in earnest. Thanks to extensive coverage of the incident in local and national media, more than 500 people participated in the search. Most of the efforts were concentrated in the area where her vehicle had been found. Police, along with search dogs, even examined a small pond located a short distance from the highway. However, despite all the efforts, the extensive media coverage, and the mountains of flyers distributed by her family and friends, Patty remained missing. On December 29th, the search was called off. While the police continued to investigate her disappearance, they suspected a far more serious crime had occurred. They focused their efforts on interviewing potential suspects. The first suspicion fell on Gary. He was a relatively new man in Patty's life. During an interview with investigators, a curious detail emerged. On Christmas Day, Gary and his sister had driven past Patty's house. They saw both spouses' cars in the driveway and the children playing outside. They simply passed by because they were planning to meet Patty that evening and didn't attempt to stop or knock on the door. Investigators speculated that Gary might have been jealous, imagining the couple reconciling. However, they quickly dismissed this idea. Firstly, the jealousy theory made little sense. According to everyone close to Patty, she was excited about her future with Gary. Secondly, he had an alibi. He had been with a family member all day, including at the time he drove past Patty's house. Thirdly, he seemed the least likely person to have something to hide. Gary was genuinely shocked when he was informed of Patty's disappearance and was the first to offer any assistance. He actively participated in the search, handed out flyers, and even volunteered to take a polygraph test, which he passed successfully. As it became clear that Gary was not involved in Patty's disappearance, the police considered another possibility, that someone from the town who had a vested interest in the couple's relationship might be connected to her disappearance. This theory would seem far-fetched if not for the public humiliation Patty had experienced at church, which indicated that such a possibility was not entirely unfounded. Still, while the public shaming was indeed degrading for Patty, there was no evidence suggesting that anyone in the town had decided to act more aggressively or take matters into their own hands. This left the police with one obvious suspect, Patty's husband, with whom she was no longer living but had not yet officially divorced. The man told the police the same story he had shared with Kathy over the phone. He insisted that whatever happened to Patty occurred after she left the house. However, interviews with family acquaintances painted a fuller picture for investigators, not only of the day of Patty's disappearance, but also of the man's possible actions afterward. Firstly, Patty spent most of the holiday locked in the bedroom. This was unusual behavior for her, especially considering that guests were arriving. Family members visited throughout the day, but JR told everyone that they wouldn't see Patty because she was in the bedroom and feeling unwell. Secondly, on Christmas Day, Patty called a locksmith to change the front door lock so that JR could no longer enter the house. Thirdly, when JR's sister Marilyn arrived, instead of spending the holiday together as planned, JR asked Marilyn to take the children to their younger sister's house. Marilyn complied with his request, effectively leaving the quarreling couple alone in the house together. This made the husband the last person to see his wife before she vanished. After his wife's disappearance, JR behaved very suspiciously. He did not assist in the search for her at all. However, he was always curious about where the search efforts were taking place. He explained this by saying that he needed to stay with the children and didn't want to leave his DNA on anything that might be found during the search. But if that were the case, why did he not even hand out flyers? Patty's mother, Patsy, brought him a stack of flyers that he was supposed to distribute, and she was very disappointed when, on her next visit, she saw them still in the same spot in the house. When Patty's boss called him and asked him to bring a spare set of keys, JR responded that he couldn't come because he was officially filing for divorce. But that wasn't all. On the very day of his wife's disappearance, he re-entered the house and soon replaced her messages on the answering machine, as if he knew she would not return. Additionally, 2 days before her disappearance, JR informed his landlord that he was giving up the apartment. There were too many strange coincidences to dismiss them as mere chance. However, the man had answers to all the questions. He stated that all his actions were the result of an argument with his wife. When he learned that she was dating Gary, he became angry. JR considered the relationship inappropriate and did not want a man he didn't know getting close to his children. Therefore, he threatened Patty that he would take back the house and ensure that she would never see the kids again. To show the seriousness of his threats, he moved his belongings back in. He claimed that the divorce filing was actually a manipulation. He wanted to issue an ultimatum to force his wife to reconcile. The refusal of the apartment was supposedly just a coincidence. The apartment was located in a somewhat unsafe area, and he decided to look for another one. But shouldn't he have found a new apartment before giving up the old one? But these explanations could be either true or fabricated. Therefore, investigators asked the man to allow them to search the house. He consented. However, since the house was not officially considered a crime scene, it was inhabited by people. While the forensic team searched for evidence, JR and his sister Marilyn were present in the home. The woman's behavior was appalling. She interfered with the forensic team's work, interrupted them, and asked inappropriate and annoying questions. It was surprising that they managed to find anything at all, but they did uncover several intriguing pieces of evidence. First and foremost, it was clear that the master bedroom had been meticulously cleaned recently, just like Patty's car. Despite this, luminol spraying revealed the presence of blood in rooms adjacent to the bedroom and in the bedroom itself. Blood was also found on a mop and bucket in the garage. Later, it would be confirmed that the blood in both the car and the house belonged to Patty. Additionally, an anonymous caller contacted the police, claiming that his friend had seen Patty's vehicle on the evening of Christmas Day, around the time she had disappeared. The car was in the same location where her boss had later found it. However, at that moment, it was not abandoned. The anonymous friend's friend had seen a man exit the car and begin running away from it, but then he stopped and returned as if he had forgotten something. Everyone was waiting for the case to be solved any moment now, but that was not the case. It's important to remember that this case took place in Texas, where a number of states, including Texas, adhere to an unwritten rule: no body, no crime. While the traces of blood, particularly on the mop and bucket, were indeed suspicious, they were not enough to warrant charges. There simply wasn't enough blood to prove that a murder had occurred. Additionally, significant evidence was compromised simply because Patty's home had never been secured as a crime scene. People continued to live in the house, which led to the loss of crucial evidence. Ultimately, JR even hired a lawyer and cut off all contact with the police. Patty's family didn't need additional evidence or his confession. 2 months after Patty's disappearance, her mother, Patsy, stormed into JR's house in the dead of night and attacked him with a baseball bat. She was charged with assault, but the case never went to trial. The only hope remained in finding Patty's body. Unfortunately, by spring 1997, when it became clear that all the blood found in the house and car belonged to Patty, no one expected to find her alive anymore. The most promising lead for the police was that during the time of her disappearance, JR's construction company was working on building 2 schools. One of the workers reported that JR had shown a peculiar interest in the concrete pouring process, even though he had never done it before, and it wasn't part of his duties. The police speculated that Patty's remains might be buried there. In May 1997, investigators brought in a ground-penetrating radar unit to one of the schools. They also enlisted the help of cadaver dogs trained to find human remains. Officially, they didn't find anything, although Patty's family claimed that there were areas that appeared suspicious to specialists during the scanning. However, frankly, no one really pursued those leads due to the high costs of the investigations. Additionally, local authorities were reluctant to disrupt the new school's construction based solely on suspicions that a body might be buried there. After all, it wasn't their daughter, mother, or sister that might be entombed in concrete. Her relatives still firmly believe that Patty lies within one of those buildings. Moreover, there was another location where Patty's body could be. In 2006, the owner of a small plot in Pleasanton reported to the police that around the time of Patty's disappearance, he noticed that JR's company had been digging a hole. The workers claimed that they had excavated it to dispose of construction debris. Unfortunately, this lead also went nowhere because the site was too close to a cemetery, which would have confused the cadaver dogs that could have helped locate a body. Additionally, several years later, neighbors of Patty recalled hearing heavy trucks on the day of her disappearance, similar to those used in construction. However, the owners of the property did not allow a search to be conducted. It was only in 2014 when the house was purchased by new owners. Since JR was never charged with anything, he gained full custody of Patty's 3 children and ultimately moved out of Texas, changing his last name. He remarried but later divorced his second wife. Tragically, he completely cut off contact between Patty's family and the children. This deeply saddened her relatives, as they lost not only Patty, but also the 3 children they loved dearly. Although the children are now adults, they have not attempted to reach out to their mother's family. Notably, while the boys were playing outside on that fateful day, their older sister Brittany was in a nearby room playing. At just 9 years old, she could have shed light on the events of that day, but it seems she was never consulted about it. In 2005, JR officially declared his wife deceased and attempted to collect her insurance. In response, Patty's family filed a lawsuit against him, alleging that her death was due to his actions. The case was settled later that year, with the funds frozen in an account awaiting the children's adulthood. However, there were no legal repercussions for JR. Patty's new boyfriend, Gary, was never considered a suspect. He tragically died in a car accident just a couple of years later. Although Patty's family continued their search for her, they faced failure and disappointment at every turn. The police never ceased their investigation into the case. In 2008, investigators revealed that they believed at least 3 people may have been involved in Patty's murder. 4 years later, they disclosed an even more intriguing development. A female DNA profile, not belonging to Patty or any of her relatives, had been found in her minivan. Detectives stated that they were almost certain of the DNA's identity, but they did not disclose the name. Regardless, they lacked sufficient evidence to obtain a DNA sample from this woman. The most popular theory regarding the events of that day suggests that Patty and JR had a heated argument because he couldn't accept her happiness in a new relationship. Either before or after he asked Marilyn to take the kids away, he may have killed Patty, possibly with a knife, given the amount of blood. He then concealed her body in the under-construction school. He left Patty's meticulously cleaned minivan on the roadside with an allegedly flat tire in a spot where it would be quickly discovered. Additionally, he thoroughly cleaned the crime scene in their home. Unfortunately, he had ample time to do so. And if, as the police assert, he had accomplices, such as his sister Marilyn, then the likelihood of successfully covering up the crime increased. However, these remain mere speculations circulating online, and the police have yet to find any concrete evidence. Patty's family vows not to give up until they uncover the truth about what happened to her. But sadly, with each passing year, the chances of bringing any potential criminals to justice diminish.